What are your salary expectations? Interview question. In this video, we're going to cover some of the best ways to answer this question, which is one of the hardest ones. I know that my own heart has pounded very hard when I've had that question being asked of me many times in the past. So how can you best answer that? That's what we're going to cover here. Make sure you watch this video till the end if you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing, because if you say something that's more than they're expecting you to, or something that's lower than what you're expected to, you can either be completely taken out of the process from the beginning, or they're just gonna go for the lower end when you could have made more. So there's a lot to gain for knowing how to answer this right. All right, just before we begin, remember to smash that like button below if you haven't done it yet. Also subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you know whenever a new video comes out. Although we publish daily, so you can know that. All right, so what are some of the best ways to answer this? Well, let's start with several things that we need to consider first. The first thing is who exactly is asking you? Also, what part of the process is it? Is it like the end of an interview with a hiring manager, or is it just a headhunter that's asking for your range? Or is it HR? Who exactly is it that is asking you, and how far along the process are you? Also, in your industry or the kind of role that you're going to go for, is there a lot of room? Like is there any guideline when it comes to how much people with your experience and the role that you're going to do actually make? If there are guidelines and there's industry standards, then that's going to help you. If there are none, then we're in a situation in which you're going to need to be more crafty in order to figure out what will be a good number to give. And that's something that we're going to get into now. So, should you give a number, a range, or say nothing at all? Well, like we mentioned earlier, it really depends on a few of the things that we've already mentioned. Ideally, you don't want to give a number or a range until you are further along in the process. What we mean by that is you don't want to just say that something to HR or to a headhunter and then have the hiring manager at the end hold you accountable for that if you didn't have a good idea for what you really wanted to make in that role, or for what that role made back when you said that in the first place. Does that make sense? If an interview process takes, a recruiting process takes, let's say 2 months, or maybe in 3 months, at the beginning of it, maybe you didn't have as much information as you had later on. And maybe you gave a number that was too low to begin with. If you gave it something that was too high, the process never started in the first place, most likely. But the truth is, even if you give a number that's too low, they can still discard you by thinking that you're just not experienced enough, you're not worth very much, you're not the type of person they're looking for. That is going to be associated negatively with you, or they're just gonna think you're just not the right person for the job. So, all right, having said that, what should you do? Well, different people have different angles of how to tackle this question. I think that there are two possibilities. You can either use it to be like a point of contention if pay is very important for you, or you can actually just how do we call it, be a team player, be harmonious, and make this a non-issue in a way that the interview will just move along more nicely. What do I mean by that? Well, you see, when you're asked this question, let's suppose that it is a headhunter. Some of the best advice that I've seen out there, I believe this one I took from Deniz, who's an amazing hiring manager. And he mentions, hey, if it's a headhunter, instead of you giving them your range, ask them for what range do they have for the kind of roles that you're looking for. Why? Because they'll have different clients. Let's say that you want to work in consulting for, I don't know, detergents, the detergent industry, or the cleaning industry. And they will have clients in that industry, and they'll have ranges that they're willing to pay for people with the seniority that you're going for. So what you can do is ask the headhunter, hey, what are some of the ranges that your clients are willing to go for, or what is the industry standard? And they'll tell you. So then you'll know. You can just tell them, okay, that's great, that's within my expectations, that's within what I'm looking for, that's great, let's get moving. Similarly, with HR, you can do something similar like that, or you can just pretend that you don't want to give them a number at the beginning. I've heard that even when you have something like a system that you have to put the numbers in, if it's an online application, you can potentially just put one or a number that's clearly not the right number, but just something that allows the system to get you to apply so you can move forward along. Something that I've heard from many other career coaches is also that you can also be if you're a good candidate, if you have the right resume, if you have everything that looks like you can be a great fit for that role, even if you don't give a number right away, you can still move along in the process. That's something that I've seen myself with some other people as well, and that I know very well. But they can still push you very hard at the beginning. So if they do, this is what you need to do. You need to be very prepared for the process, even from the beginning, even from the get-go. Why? Because if your industry, and most industries have some sort of standards or ranges when it comes to what does someone in your role and with your level of seniority in this geography, this city, this country usually make. So what you want to do is you want to know that, to have that range in your mind from different sources so that you can actually give an intelligent response. This means that you'll come across as someone who, you're not being arrogant if you're asking for too much, if that's what the role entails, right? You're not giving a number yourself. You're just saying, hey, this is the impartial information that's being recollected from the market. And that will be one of the biggest things that you can do. You can either do that, but here's the issue with actually giving a range, and that's that people will usually just go for the lower end, and you don't want to do that because there's this cognitive effect that's called anchoring, which means that they are, from then on, they're going to start thinking of you with the lower part of the end of that range that you gave. So what you want to do is you want to go in and you want to say something along the lines of, oh, I've seen that usually the average salary is this much. I believe I add above average value or the same amount of value, but whatever. You can just increase that number by like 5 or 10%, and just give them a number. This is something that I've seen other people recommend as well, and I think this is brilliant because what you're doing is you're anchoring their expectations of what you want on the higher end, and then even if they win by giving you a little bit less than that, that's still more than they would have given you if you had given a range that was too big and they could have just gone with like a small number. To give you an example, let's say that you're going for a job that's between 80 and 100K per year. Then you say, oh, it's between, I know the range, the industry standard is between 80 and 100K, that's within my expectations. Well, then they're gonna move the conversation on forward thinking of 80, while you yourself may be thinking of 100, but that's a big difference. Instead, what you could do is go in and say, I understand the industry standard is somewhere along the north of 95, 100K plus. So I'm actually looking for a salary of about $110,000 or $105,000, right? So again, like supposedly that's only 5 to 10% higher than, let's say, the average of the range, or a little bit higher than the max of the range. So then it doesn't appear too crazy. You're valuing yourself very well, so they're anchoring higher. Oh, 110. Oh, but we can only pay 100. That's the most that we can see, that we see people in the industry doing. So okay, they'll maybe make an offer for 100, and then you'll be like, I don't know, but 100 is much better than 80, which is what you would have gotten most likely if you had just set a range instead of giving them a number instead. So what is my recommendation? My recommendation is to look for the industry standard and do one of two things. First, if it is a hiring manager, then, and that's the most important part, of the process, but when you're closer to the end, you want to go in and you can take two approaches. You can do either being very altruistic, teamwork related. You don't want to make it an issue, and it is a very standardized industry. In other words, salaries are very close to each other, generally speaking, based on the role and experience and whatnot. You can see management consulting, investment banking, some of those, right? Yeah, there can be a lot of discrepancies, but usually, let's say an associate at a bank in this region, New York or whatever, makes usually this much, right? There, it's much easier for you to go in and make it a non-issue. You say, okay, well, I've made my research, and according to this source and this source and this source, someone with my level of experience and ability to contribute to this company in this locality usually makes around this much. and that is within my salary expectations. There, it's okay to give a range. Just make sure that the lower end is much closer to the top so that the anchoring is actually working for you. But again, if you're completely okay with getting that money because you know, I mean, that pay, even on the lower end, because you know it is a standardized industry, so you're very likely to get that and not less than that. Or you can do the other thing that I mentioned, and that is it can still be a non-issue. You can say, well, I've seen that the average, according to multiple sources that I've gotten, is around $100,000, even if that's a little bit higher than the average per se. So I believe I can add a little bit more to it because of XYZ, based on the results I've gotten in my previous employers. So I believe a fair offer will be about $110,000 if that's within expectations, or something along those lines. 110, 105 if the average is about 100, right? So you want to increase it 5 to 10%. Then they're gonna think, okay, like that makes sense. Like it doesn't look like you're just asking off the cuff like a crazy person. You're basing yourself off of numbers that actually have a meaning to them and have some strength to them. You're not making the numbers up, and you're actually anchoring higher rather than lower, and you're closer to make it a non-issue if you're just doing it like I'm doing it right now, like very non-committal, like that's just the way it goes. This is what I'm asking for. I know what I'm doing. I'm not nervous. I'm not sweating. I don't have my my heart pumping like crazy. Like people can tell when you go like, oh, like. So that's a good tip that you can use. Does that make sense? If so, comment below. Again, like if it's with HR, you just gotta make sure that you don't overcommit to something that you don't want. So essentially, you want to go into the entire process knowing this industry average or close to average, going for a little bit further along on the higher end, giving a number instead of a range, and having that number be slightly above what will be expected for that role, so that they anchor higher, and when they adjust lower, they still give you a good amount when they make a first offer. All right, so that's HR. The headhunters, we already mentioned it, and with the hiring manager, we already mentioned it as well. And we also mentioned the 2 approaches. So if you felt like this was useful, remember to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and hit the notification bell so you know whenever a new video comes out.